More and more people are waking up to the existence of unidentified flying objects, or unidentified aerial phenomena, as it's commonly called now. Since 2017, the Pentagon has begun to declassify and confirm the authenticity of multiple documents and videos depicting military encounters with UAP. The most famous of these encounters is with the Tic Tac craft, which was witnessed in 2004. The craft was detected and seen by numerous members of the U.S. Navy, including pilot David Fravor, who pursued the object. Most people don't seem to realize the Tic Tac appeared alongside many other anomalous objects, some of which were underwater, and were also picked up on the radar, disappearing, reappearing, moving at 13,000 miles per hour, and making other bizarre and impossible maneuvers. Other documented UAP have been identified as glowing spheres, triangular crafts, and a cube within a sphere. U.S. Navy Lieutenant Ryan Graves said that his squadron began seeing UAP, or UFOs, hovering over restricted airspace southeast of Virginia Beach in 2014. This is an ongoing phenomenon, and there's a history to these encounters. But before we get into all that, I'd like to thank you for watching and ask you to subscribe if you haven't already. During World War II, many anomalous crafts were spotted, usually being described as green fireballs or called Foo Fighters. As these sightings continued, some of the most concerning encounters would take place at nuclear power plants, nuclear test sites, and nuclear weapons storage bunkers. There are actually a lot of these encounters, and they're pretty well documented. So, I'm choosing specific encounters to show the history and key sightings of UAPs and nukes, because this is serious and it actually affects us all. U.S. Air Force, FBI, and CIA files, declassified through the Freedom of Information Act, establish a convincing, ongoing pattern of UFO activity at American nuclear weapons sites, extending back to December 1948. In late 1948, quote, green fireballs were reported in the skies near atomic laboratories in Los Alamos and Sandia, New Mexico, the two sites where the atomic bomb was being created. The sightings continued through the testing, development, and creation of the atomic bomb. These fireballs were seen by civilian and military witnesses. Newspapers from the time also wrote about the encounters. In 1949, the FBI San Antonio field office sent a classified 3-page letter to FBI Director Hoover to express security concerns caused by the phenomena of UFO encounters. It goes on to describe how the Atomic Energy Commission, which is now the Department of Energy, installation at Los Alamos was the site of many UFO encounters and sightings. The document, dated January 31st, 1949, tells us that there were UFO sightings on 10 days, some consecutive, between December 5th, 1948 and January 6th, 1949. These UFOs were witnessed by special agents of the Office of Special Investigations, airline pilots, military pilots, Los Alamos security inspectors, and private citizens. And yet another FBI memorandum from September 18, 1950, discusses the ongoing UFO activity at Los Alamos and Sandia, and states that there were over 150 encounters in a 2-year time span. As a side note, the document also states, quote, observations of aerial phenomena occurring within the vicinity of sensitive installations have been recorded by the Air Force since December 1948. The phenomena have been classified into 3 general types, which are identified as follows. 1. Green fireballs, objects moving at high speed in shapes resembling half moons, circles, and disks, emitting green light. 2. Disks, round flat-shaped objects or phenomena moving at fast velocity and emitting a brilliant white light or reflected light. Meteors, aerial phenomena resembling meteoric material moving at high velocity and varying in color. In the 60s, intercontinental ballistic missiles were created, and the phenomena followed. Over 160 ex-United States Air Force members have come forward to share their experiences with UAP interfering with our atomic weaponry. One of these men is ex-U.S. Air Force First Lieutenant Dr. Bob Jacobs. September 14th, 1964, Jacobs was dispatched to the Vandenburg Air Force Base in California to photograph, with high-speed instrumentation, an Atlas missile launch. His crew's mission was to record all 3 stages of the rocket's flight, including the separation of a dummy warhead on the edge of space. Dr. Bob was quoted as saying, "We were testing to see if we could launch a nuclear warhead into orbit, slightly above the nuclear chaff, so the Russians would aim their anti-missile missiles at the chaff, and our little warhead would fly over and obliterate Moscow. That was the game we were playing." Horrifying to think about it in retrospect. That night, Dr. Bob took the films to Vandenburg Air Force Base to be developed. The next morning, however, he was ordered immediately into his superior's office, Major Florence J. Mansman. I'll let him explain what happened next in his own words.
I walked into his office and they had a screen and a 16mm projector set up. There was a couch, and Major Mansman said, "Sit down," and there were 2 guys, as I recall, 2 guys in gray suits, civilian clothes, which was fairly unusual. Major Mansman said, "Watch this," and turned on the film projector. And I watched the screen, and there was the launch from the day or 2 before it at Big Sur. As the Atlas missile entered the frame, we could see the whole 3rd stage, which has 2 rocket nozzles like this and one in the center, a gimbaled one in the center, filling our frame from about 160 miles. That was pretty exciting optics. And then on that telescope, we could see the warhead, the dummy warhead.
According to Jacobs, at this stage the rocket was traveling between 11 and 14,000 miles per hour when a saucer-shaped craft entered the frame.
It flew into the frame like this, and it shot a beam of light at the warhead. Now, remember, all this stuff is flying at several thousand miles an hour. So this thing fires a beam of light at the warhead, hits it, fires another beam of light, and then flies out the way it came in. And the warhead tumbles out of space.
Though Dr. Jacobs' testimony is extraordinary, and we do not have a copy of this supposed film, nor do we have any Air Force documents attesting to this event, we do have the word of Dr. Jacobs' superior, Major Mansman. The following quotes come from letters written by Major Mansman. The shape was classic disc. The center seemed to be a raised bubble. Not sure any ports or slits could be seen, but was stationary or moving slightly, floating over the entire lower saucer shape, which was glowing, and seemed to be rotating slowly at the point of beam release. We knew the missile, nose cone, size, but could not compare since we did not know how far from the missile the object was from the missile at the time of beam release. I think it's important to note that Major Mansman describes this UAP as rotating, which is the exact same thing that we see in the gimbal video, which again was one of the UAP videos declassified by the Pentagon. One of the primary examples of UFOs interfering with nuclear weapons is the Oscar flight incident, which took place at Malmstrom Air Force Base, a storage site for nuclear-tipped ICBMs located in Montana. According to their sworn affidavits, Robert Salas and Dwight Arneson were stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base when a UFO shut down all 10 missiles. Salas was on duty as a Deputy Missile Combat Crew Commander underground during the morning hours of March 16, 1967. His job was to oversee the readiness and security of the 10 ICBMs there, and also to launch the missiles if he was ordered to do so. That evening, Salas received a call from his flight security controller. He reported that he and other members of the flight security team had been observing some lights in the sky, making unusual maneuvers. He stated that he did not think they were aircraft, since they were traveling at a very high velocity and making unusual directional changes. He also said that there was no engine noise. He said that it was so unusual, he thought he should report it. Salas thanked him for his report, but did not consider it significant at the time, and ended the conversation. Within minutes, Salas received a second call from the flight security controller. Quote, his voice was highly agitated, and he was screaming. He said there was a large, glowing, pulsating, red oval-shaped object hovering over the front gate. He told me it was about 30 to 40 feet in diameter. He also said that he had his men outside with their weapons drawn, observing the object. He then asked if I had any direction for him. I simply told him not to allow anything inside the perimeter fence. He then abruptly cut off the conversation and said he had to go because one of his men was injured. It's important to note that injuries caused by contact with UAP are mentioned in many other reports and encounters. On April 5th, 2022, The Sun published an article explaining that they filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all files related to the Pentagon's Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, the same program that I mentioned earlier, which studied these anomalous encounters from 2007 to 2012. Among the 1,500 pages released is a document called Anomalous Acute and Subacute Field Effects on Human Biological Tissues. Within this document is a catalog of UFO-related human biological effects. The list was compiled by the civilian organization, the Mutual UFO Network, in the late 90s. It lists a number of effects caused by human proximity to UAP, including injuries such as radiation burns, loss of consciousness, electrical shock, pain, death, and many others. And among some of the more bizarre effects are abductions, genesis of ESP abilities, nightmares, perceived teleportation, and unaccounted for pregnancy. I recommend that you read the document for yourself. It's very interesting that the Pentagon considered this a useful database. It was after this phone call that Salas realized that all 10 ICBMs had been taken offline, meaning they were useless. Having more than 2 missiles go down at once was unprecedented, so this was a very serious security concern. According to the affidavit of another witness on that day, Dwight C. Arneson, years after the incident, left the Air Force and worked for Boeing, where he befriended a man named Robert Kaminsky. Boeing was the prime contractor for these missiles, and Kaminsky was the Boeing engineering team leader for the investigation of this missile shutdown event.
What surprised me more than anything else is I ran across an incident that I personally was involved in as an engineer at the Boeing company, and it had to do with UFOs. And so I realized that what I went through in that particular incident tells me that the government does know. They have ideas of what's going on, and it appears that there is a cabal or a government within the government. People who are keeping the lid on things, no matter how much comes out, they rigidly keep a lid on. Now, this UFO incident that I'm referring to is, I was a project engineer, and we got a report which we would help the Air Materiel area do some engineering on certain missile sites. They sent in a report that said, hey, we had 10 sites that went down. They were in the green, ready for launch, and then 1 second, and then a few seconds later, they were all in the red. They were not launchable. And knowing how the missile systems are put together and how they're intertied and how the redundancy network goes there, it's virtually impossible for having 10 of them go down. You can have 1, maybe 2.
When Salas asked his squadron commander if the event was an Air Force exercise, he assured him that the United States Air Force had nothing to do with this. This is consistent with United States Air Force policy on UFOs from later years, where it's stated that UFO reports are never considered national security threats. Salas makes the point of saying that clearly this is not the case, given these numerous intrusions on military bases and nuclear sites. Even to this day, though the Navy has come a long way in beginning disclosure, the USAF refuses to do the same despite possessing even more aerospace data than the Navy. Detractors from Salas's claims are ex-Air Force members Eric Carlson and Walter Feigl. The men do agree that the shutdown of 10 ICBMs did take place, but state that they heard no calls about UFOs, nor did they see any report or follow-up on what exactly happened that day. This is not an isolated incident. There are additional reports of UFO encounters at Malmstrom Air Force Base, as well as many reports from other nuclear missile launch sites, which are also well documented, such as Minot Air Force Base, Warren Air Force Base, and others. The disclosure of this information has been spearheaded by Robert Salas and Robert Hastings. Hastings brought the information forward in 2010 by holding a press conference called UFOs and Nukes. Multiple ex-USAF members also came forward to tell their stories of UFOs interacting with nuclear weapons. These witnesses participating in the press conference also provided sworn affidavits affirming their experiences with UFOs while serving in the military. This phenomena is not exclusive to America either. October 4th, 1982, near a farming village in Ukraine, an incident took place which could have started an accidental nuclear war. According to a report by ABC News, which cited KGB documents and interviews with Soviet officials, this was a mass sighting event with multiple witnesses. Allegedly, everyone in the village claimed to have seen a flying saucer on that day, saying that the craft was huge, about 900 feet in diameter. For hours, this object hovered over the nearby ballistic missile base. This missile base is where Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Plantanev worked. Plantanev stated, quote, "It looked just like a flying saucer, the way they show them in the movies. No portholes, nothing. The surface was absolutely even. There was no sound. I had never seen anything like that before." Plantanev was inside the bunker on that day when the signal lights on the control panel suddenly turned on. Colonel Igor Chernovshev stated, quote, "During this period, for a short time, signal lights on both the control panels suddenly turned on, the lights showing that missiles were preparing for launch. This could normally only happen if an order were transmitted from Moscow. The base lost control of its nuclear weapons. Eventually, the UAP disappeared, and the missiles were brought back under control." Whether you believe the phenomenon to be of non-human origin, or perhaps a black-budget military program, the fact remains that these crafts manipulated some of the most dangerous weapons known to mankind. What are their intentions? Are they trying to send us a message? And why is it that these UAP seem to stalk our military sites, aircraft carriers, and especially our nuclear site? I will leave you with this clip of the Washington Post interviewing Lou Elizondo, former director of the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. And in this clip, he discusses the fact that UAP are able to manipulate our nuclear weapons and that other countries have declassified the same things happening to them. Thank you for watching.
And several of these UFO sightings have been above secret nuclear weapons facilities. Almost every major nuclear power across the globe really has reported and declassified these sightings. You have talked extensively about the connection here, which might be helpful, I think, for some people to hear in advance of my next question, which is whether or not the U.S. government has considered utilizing nuclear-powered naval fleets to lure these kinds of things to further study them.
Wow. So first of all, Jackie, thank you for asking such a thoughtful question. Obviously, you've done some homework. And I also want to, by the way, thank you as a journalist for following this topic, because I know there's a lot of risk involved, and I also know there's been traditionally a lot of stigma and taboo associated with it. So I want to congratulate you for your courage, and thank you and your audience for at least having this conversation. But secondly,
from
yes,
a
that
national
is
security
one
perspective,
of the concerns we had. There does seem to be some sort of congruency or some sort of intersection between these UAP or UFO sightings and our nuclear technology, whether it's nuclear propulsion, nuclear power and generation, or nuclear weapon systems. Furthermore, those same observations have been seen overseas in other countries. They too have had the same incidents. So that tells us this is a global issue. Now, in this country, we've had incidents where these UAPs have interfered and actually brought offline our nuclear capabilities. And I think to some, they would probably say, well, that's a sign that whatever this is something that is peaceful. But in the same context, we also have data suggesting that in other countries, these things have interfered with their nuclear technology and actually turned them on, put them online. So that is equally, for me, just as concerning. I think that there is certainly at this point enough data to demonstrate there is an interest in our nuclear technology, a potential to even interfere with that nuclear technology. And when you look at all these naval ships out there, let's take the Nimitz battle carrier fleet, for example. In some cases, you're talking about a nuclear footprint probably bigger than most cities. You have a nuclear-powered carrier with aircraft on board, and then you have nuclear-powered destroyers. You have nuclear-powered submarines, some of those with nuclear weapons on board, or certainly nuclear capabilities. I'll just say that. So I think, yeah, it shouldn't be a surprise that maybe there is an increased interest in our capabilities as it relates to our nuclear technology, and the Navy is certainly not immune to that.